Republic in the west keeps Prague as its capital and has a population of 10 million. Slovakia, with 5 million people, has Bratislava as its capital.
The flag of the new Slovakia is already flying. Czechoslovakia, born 74 years ago, expires tonight. And the Slovak nationalists, whose victory in this year's elections doomed it, are celebrating its passing. But across the frozen landscape of the old Federation, there doesn't seem so much to celebrate, especially where the Czechs are putting in 18 border posts on previously open roads, some with customs officers already in place. These two, transferred from the Austrian border, regret the expense and have no idea how it will work. The welder is a Slovak, born 50 yards one side of the post. He lives 50 yards the other, predicts he'll be smuggling potatoes between the two. It's a hard case to argue that Europe needs more borders. Either side of this one and much further afield, there are great apprehensions about what's happening here. It's a triumph of nationalism and not much else, as the two republics go their separate ways. Back in Prague, the Czechs keep their national symbols and 2/3 of the old Federation. But it wasn't for this that they overthrew the communists 3 years ago.
20 people have been crushed to death during New Year's celebrations in agreement with the country's coal miners aimed at ending a 2-week pit strike. The miners have been promised a review of pensions, sick pay and other benefits, but there's been no pledge over guaranteeing the miners' main demand, the real value of wages. The Republic of Czechoslovakia ceased to exist a few minutes ago. From midnight local time, it was replaced by separate Czech and Slovak sovereign states. The Czech Republic in the west keeps Prague as its capital and has a population of 10 million. Slovakia, with 5 million people, has Bratislava as its capital. The split has been achieved peacefully, and there's concern about the consequences of the so-called velvet divorce.
The revelries have begun, which will not end until Slovakia is fully independent for the first time in its history. The future, it's to be hoped, more peaceful than the past that was remembered here. The change is in fact peaceful, as Czechoslovakia comes to an end after 74 years. Its fate was sealed by the victory of the nationalists in this year's election. Today, they were celebrating its passing. But across the frozen landscape of the old Federation, there doesn't seem so much to celebrate, especially where the Czechs are putting in 18 border posts on previously open roads, some with customs officers already in place. These two, transferred from the Austrian border, regret the expense and have no idea how it will work. The welder is a Slovak, born 50 yards one side of the post. He lives 50 yards the other, predicts he'll be smuggling potatoes between the two. It's a hard case to argue that Europe needs more borders. Either side of this one and much further afield, there are great apprehensions about what's happening here. It's a triumph of nationalism and not much else, as the two republics go their separate ways. Back in Prague, the Czechs keep their national symbols and 2/3 of the old Federation. But it wasn't for this that they overthrew the communists 3 years ago. Jan Orban was one of the leaders of the revolution then. And now?
I feel defeated. I didn't fight the communism as a dissident to see this happening 3 years after the change.
But the nationalists have won. They're already here with their symbols of the old and the new, but many Czechs and some Slovaks won't be celebrating. Martin Bell, BBC News, Bratislava.
We've begun to think really about how they're going to handle
Now.
Every hour. This is the BBC.
Hello and welcome to the BBC World Service News at 7 o'clock GMT. I'm Lindsay Brancher. The headlines. The Slovak national flag is raised in Bratislava as the beginning of the new year marks the end of the unified Czechoslovak state. Fireworks for the launch of the European single market. The outgoing British presidency hands its hopes and problems on. And 20 people are killed in Hong Kong as celebrations of the new year turn to tragedy. There have been celebrations in the Slovak capital Bratislava to mark the separation of Czechoslovakia into two sovereign states. The split has made Slovakia independent for the first time in its history. But the Republic's Prime Minister, Vladimir Mečiar, said he hoped economic cooperation with the Czechs would remain close.
This is how Slovaks marked a new year and a new adventure in political independence. As the clock struck midnight, the flag of the Slovak Republic was raised ceremonially, a symbol of what Slovakia's nationalists regard as their people's final emancipation. Government ministers joined the cheering crowds. They heard the Prime Minister, Mr. Vladimir Mečiar, proclaim their new state to the world. Slovakia is ours, he said, and will be for all the years to come. This enthusiasm for independence is not universal. Many Slovaks are lamenting the loss of Czechoslovakia. They say the new Slovak states will be economically weak and politically divided. But for now, nothing will stop supporters of independence rejoicing at the fulfillment of what they call their 1,000-year dream of freedom.
Official celebrations will take place in Prague today to mark the Czech Republic's independence. The Prime Minister Václav Klaus will address a special session of Parliament on his future policies for the country. Mr. Klaus said earlier that the Czech people could be proud of the peaceful way in which the separation from Slovakia had been achieved. He said Czechs now wanted to put the past behind them and seek closer ties with the European community.
We have already crossed the Rubicon between the old communist regime and a normal democratic society and market economy. So definitely our eyes are turning, not now, but 3 years ago, to the West.
New Year celebrations in Europe have heralded not only the passing of 1992, but also the birth of one of the world's biggest free trade zones. A trail of fires and beacons was lit across Europe from...
Its velvet divorce, a peaceful division into the Czech Republic and Slovakia.
The loss of Czechoslovakia. They say the new Slovak states will be economically weak and politically divided. But for now, nothing will stop supporters of independence rejoicing at the fulfillment of what they call their 1,000-year dream of freedom.
The signing of the treaty at Versailles in 1919 cemented the Czech lands of Bohemia, Moravia and part of Silesia firmly to Slovakia. The new republic's spiritual leaders believed the state would act as a buffer against German expansionism. But Czechoslovakia included a large German-speaking minority in northern Bohemia. Less than 10 years later, as Britain and America looked on, Adolf Hitler's army marched in and took control. Following the Second World War, the Republic's borders were restored, and in a spate of what would now be called ethnic cleansing, almost all its German-speaking inhabitants were expelled. At elections in 1946, the Communists emerged as the largest party, and by 1948 had complete control of Czechoslovakia. Its new communist leader, Klement Gottwald, aligned himself closely with the Soviet-led East European bloc. He followed rigid Stalinist rules, and there were many political trials. De-Stalinization didn't come easily, but when it did, it was shortly followed by a new liberalism and a new leader, Alexander Dubček. Despite his loyalty to communism, other Eastern Bloc governments feared his policies of greater freedom of expression, more genuine elections, and a greater separation of party and state. Soviet tanks rolled in, and the Prague Spring was crushed. It wasn't until 1989, when the communist bloc finally crumbled, that Czechoslovakia re-emerged to take control of its own destiny. Its new president, Václav Havel, had the dreams of many who still believed an independent dual nation could exist. But elections last June have put paid to all that with the emergence of a new leader in Slovakia, Vladimir Mečiar. He believes Slovakia would have been the poor relation in the Republic. It may well be even poorer outside it.
And as one border went up, the New Year celebration
here honored Slovakia's last brief attempt at independence, but that occurred with Nazi compliance, and not all Slovaks care to remember. This split comes 7 months after each republic elected leaders with opposing views on economic and political policy. The Czech Republic's Václav Klaus and Slovakia's Vladimir Mečiar have negotiated a division of property and assets that includes everything from the army to the railroad. But they never went back to the public for a vote, and opinion polls taken over the last few months indicate as much as half of the population of each republic never wanted this to happen. Opinions on the streets of Bratislava range from enthusiasm to concern.
I love Czechs. I have a lot of friends, and for me this is a very bad situation.
Without the church, it was better. Was without.
Economists say both republics will suffer some economic setbacks, but they will be more pronounced in Slovakia, which already has a higher unemployment rate and where the government advocates slower economic reforms. Those in business have heard all the predictions.
Everybody in the business world expects that the purchase power of the Slovakian people will go down. Of course, we can discuss a lot about is it true or not, but generally everybody expects.
The two republics will continue to share the same currency, at least for a while. Anna Maria Tremonti, CBC News, Bratislava.
Well, the new year means separation for Czechoslovakia. For the European community, it means unification of sorts. More on that in just a few minutes. We'll also have a report on a new kind of explorer who's about to go where no man has ever gone before.